Hey, folks.
Hey, Aaron, can you hear me?
I can. How you doing, Luis?
Good. There's my picture. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing it. How are you doing?
Surviving.
Yeah. Yeah, back in Chalice?
Yes. Yeah, we're getting ready to leave soon, though. We've got a outfitted trip we're doing in Utah. So got the I call us gypsy outfitters now.
Is that trademarked?
So anyway, yeah, we're getting ready to head to Utah.
Nice. How are the fires down there? Aren't there a couple in western Utah?
You know, I looked at the Fish Lake National Forest and didn't see any that were significant in the hunting area we're going to be in. You know, we might get the same smoke that we're getting here, which has gotten worse. So, but
Well, for once, if not, well, not for once, but it's not too frequent that Idaho doesn't have the worst of the fires. So
I know. I feel like
not
we've
a
been in the
yeah, we've
donut
been lucky,
hole.
right?
Yep, we
Yep.
have.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Western Oregon and Washington are just ablaze. So let's see. Oh, we still got a couple minutes.
Hi, Aaron.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Doing it.
Yeah. How's the air in Boise?
Oh, it's smoggy, smoky. Yeah, I'm only down here for a short spell, luckily. Try to not be here whenever I don't have to be for the legislature. So
Great. Where do you go when you're not in Boise then?
all over the place. Stanley, salmon. Spent a lot of time in salmon or round salmon this year.
Nice.
McCall area, Riggins area, but taking the mobile office around. We're gonna have an official IOGA mobile office here soon. Gonna take the show officially on the road.
Oh, cool.
Hi, guys.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, Susan.
Morning, Susan.
Let's see. We've got 8 or 9 folks in. Susan, should we just give it a couple more minutes, see if anybody else joins before going on? I know I talked to at least 2 or 3 who aren't on yet who said they were going to. You're muted, but I'll take that as a send.
Just use hand signals.
Yeah, it's going to be a long Zoom. All facial expressions and gesticulation.
We'll do charades.
Yeah. Feels like what they're saying about the needs assessment is positive.
3 words. Flag.
Becca, long time no see. How you doing?
Sorry, I'm on an iPad. I haven't used it before, so everything's in different spots. I'm good. Good. Survived this summer, so it's good.
Yeah.
Are you guys wrapping it up, Becca?
Yeah, the corral, well, kind of. The corrals are closed. Pack trips are done, but we've got a lot of staff in hunting camp right now, so we've got a full season, which is great. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we may have a couple more join here, but in the interest of time, unless somebody knows somebody explicitly who's going to join on in the next couple minutes that isn't here yet, maybe we could, well, there's one. So we might just might get going. So everyone else here, I think I put it in the email, but Susan had reached out a while ago, following up on our suggestion last call we had with SNRA folks, suggestion of trying to keep some sort of ongoing communication going, not least around needs assessment. So Susan reached out and offered to, or suggested that we do that and have a meeting just where Forest Service can update us, or they can update us about where that process is, where it isn't, or what to expect going forward, and maybe field any questions you all might have. So Susan, is there something you'd like to, do you want to just lead off, jump into it?
Yeah, you bet. So I'll introduce Mary Greenwood, who has been working with us through the enterprise team. And she really has been the, I think, the brains around this whole needs assessment for us, which has been great. So she has a presentation that she prepared, and we'll have her present that and introduce herself as well. And then we'll just have some Q&A at the end, and make sure everybody has an opportunity to, get any answers they might have, follow that. So Mary, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and go from there.
All right, sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Greenwood. I'm a recreation planner with the Enterprise Program, which, for those of you who might not know, is still part of the U.S. Forest Service. We're just based out of the Washington office, and we lend assistance to various units that have projects and needs, but maybe not the capacity to complete them themselves. I am located in Big Piney, Wyoming, so I'm in southwestern Wyoming. And before coming to the Enterprise Program, I did work on the Bridger Teton and various forest units throughout the Intermountain West. And so my career has taken me quite a few paths. I've done just basic general management. I was an outfitter and guide permanent administrator as well for the Bridger Teton. And I work quite a lot in capacity, not only with outfitter and guides, but wild and scenic rivers, national historic trails, and other rec planning. So I have kind of a broad and varied background when it comes to this sort of thing. So if you're ready for me, I'll just go ahead and share my screen. And what I'm hoping to provide for you today is just an overview. We completed our outfitter and guide needs assessment, which is really the first step before getting into the big, the meaty portion of it, which is more the capacity. The needs assessment is more that first look to get a really get an in-depth understanding of what the current situation is in the Sawtooth National Recreation Area from the recreation side of the house, and just get an understanding on where any gaps might be. So that's what I'm going to present to you today, and I will have plenty of time for questions at the end too. But if anything seems really pressing in the moment, don't hesitate to speak up and let me know if you have a question or concern that I can answer right then.
And Mary, let me know if you're not able to share. I'll see if
Okay.
there's Zoom magic. If not,
Okay. Let's see. Share this. All right. So as I said before, this is the an overview of the outfitter and guide needs assessment for the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. I know you all have been informed of this, aware of it, have been participants in it as well, from the providing feedback and comments just on your feelings about the need for outfitter and guide services, as well as some of the crowding and capacity issues in the NRA as well. A needs assessment really is just a framework for natural resource managers to determine really where there is a public need, as well as an agency need for outfitter and guide services. What these needs assessments do is they really just try and present the full picture of not only what kind of use is occurring, what types of use are occurring, but where we might be having some gaps as well. The needs assessments also allow managers to kind of prioritize expansion, as well as have a full and complete background picture for authorizing additional outfitter and guide services where there is competitive interest and high demand. And having this background information really helps not only prioritize where they're going to focus those efforts and focus more energy, but it really just helps ensure that both the public, the agency, and the outfitter and guides are all their needs are being met at the same time. And that's the really critical component of all the work that we do here, is making sure that the public's needs are met, the resource needs are met, the agency's needs are met, and so that everyone can succeed really as we move forward. What a needs assessment is not, and this is one of the big kickers, is the needs assessment is not intended to reduce or expand existing use. So this really is just that background picture. This is the bedrock document to then move forward into those capacity discussions, into developing a purpose, a need, a proposed action to move forward into a capacity decision, which would go through the NEPA process and would have a lot of public involvement and opportunities for your involvement to be part of that process and to be heard in that process as well. So this is really just that background, giving the picture of it's really, the needs assessment is developing the purpose and need, and then from there we would develop what we would call the proposed action, which would be any change, addition, reduction, any sort of change to the existing capacity and existing services that are allowed. So some of the components and considerations of these needs assessments, we really consider a lot of elements that to encompass both that public need as well as the agency need. We want to make sure that when we are doing these, it's not one-sided. I mean, our purpose as the Forest Service is to provide public services, and so these needs assessments are not only and not solely about the agency need, but they are also there on the public need as well as what the resource itself, what the land can actually handle as well. So when we look at determining public and agency need, we look at existing recreation opportunities. We look at what the resource condition is in those areas where those opportunities are occurring. We look at outfitter and guide opportunities as well as their utilization. So that's not only what services are offered by the outfitter and guides, but what that utilization rate is. So how much actual use is actually occurring compared to the authorized use. We also take in consideration if there's requests for new guided activities, and that's coming not only from you as the outfitters, but from comments that we're getting from the public. If people are coming in asking, hey, does someone provide X, Y, and Z? Do you know who could help me with this? Do you know who could help me with that? So those requests are important as well. We also look at the amount of non-commercial recreation opportunities, not only that are out there, but what is actually being utilized and what the public is actually doing. Are they able to take themselves out on horses? Is the community that's recreating here feel competent enough and have the resources to actually take themselves out on horseback? Or is that something that we're seeing a high desire for with a low ability to actually execute? And then obviously we do have to take in consideration our agency management objectives. So that's not only for the Forest Land and Resource Management Plan, that's also the Sawtooth National Recreation Area Management Plan, and looking at the various components. There's also, you've got Wild and Scenic Rivers and Wilderness Management Plans in there as well. So there's a lot of components from the management side of that. We do take in consideration, like I just said, we do take in consideration the special area management requirements. We take into consideration the forest recreation niche, which really is something that it hasn't been as big a focus lately, but about 12 years ago, there was a big focus to really develop and highlight the specific niche that we felt special areas in the forest themselves are providing to the recreation, to the recreating public. Again, we focus on the kind of use that's happening out there, outfitter and guide actual use versus authorized use, and then also public involvement, comments, concerns, questions, needs, issues that we see arise. So although I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, the role of recreation commercial services, outfitter and guides play a critical role in helping forests to achieve their desired conditions for recreation opportunities. In particular, outfitter and guiding really helps capitalize on providing education and interpretive services. Now, are you guys seeing the videos block your screen, or are you able to adjust those on your?
Should be able to adjust them,
Okay.
but I can't speak for everyone.
Okay. Additionally, outfitter and guides definitely help provide the protection of sensitive resources. Additionally, and that's tied up with that education and interpretation as well, providing that education and for leave no trace on proper land use when you're in the backcountry. Also, a really strong component that recreation commercial services provide is helping build positive national forest constituencies. Really helping those people who might not have had an original connection to the land, who might not be from the immediate area, but who are coming from more urban areas and might not feel that strong connection to our public lands. And by utilizing a commercial service might then really build that appreciation and become a great partner moving forward for public lands in the future. And lastly, fostering access to opportunities. Like we all know, there are some services that, although people have a desire to do, there's a skill level or an equipment level, investment level that not all people are able to invest in. So providing those opportunities for folks to get out and recreate in a way that they might not be able to do on their own. So one of the components we looked at was forest recreation use. Although the National Visitor Use Monitoring data is a survey that occurs every 5 years on national forests, and although it can be flawed, it is one of our best options for looking at large-scale visitor use and how it occurs on a forest. So for the Sawtooth National Forest in 2015, they reported a little over 1.3 million forest visitors. For the NRA, it was reported out at 420,000, which was down from the 2010 NVUM of 459,000. And talking with Susan and the rest of the staff on the NRA, this is felt to be a low estimate of what the actual visitation was. And that is to be expected, although the NVUM does did account specifically for the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. It is a controlled sample size, so there is a chance you're not getting precise data when you're trying to monitor how many people are actually coming in. A couple of things that were important and really stood out to me as I was looking through and comparing all the data is that the participation, so the NVUM data gives you not only visits, it gives you all the demographics, age, breakouts. It also gives you primary participation of activities, length of participation, duration of those activities. It gives just a whole lot of information. For this purpose, for the needs assessment, one of the other big things I really focused on was the participation of activities. And in NVUM, there are only there's 3 winter categories, but 2 skiing. There's either downhill skiing in a resort, or there's cross-country skiing, which includes backcountry ski touring. And a really important thing to look at from there was the increase in participation in that category from 20% in 2010 to 44%. This was a primary cross-country skiing, or this backcountry skiing was the primary activity people reported. 44% reported that as their primary activity in 2015. So it was pretty interesting to see that that increase between the 2 surveys. In general, visitors reported that they weren't feeling overly crowded. The average rating was 4 out of 10. So overall, that's not an excessively high level of crowding, with the highest rating of 5.5 being at overnight developed use sites. Obviously, we don't take anything just in a vacuum. We know there are various trailheads, trails, and areas that do get a high amount of use that are experiencing some crowding out there, but looking at the NRA as a whole, that's it is reassuring to see that it's not, you're not sitting there in the 8-9 realm of feeling overcrowded.
Quick question, if you don't
Yep.
mind, on NVUM data. So 2015 was the latest analysis of that. So we have nothing for the past 5 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's done every 5 years. So it should be occurring this year. And then it usually takes about a year or so to process all the data. So.
And so the needs assessment didn't address it. For instance, you had, I think, question in there as to your primary, I think, was that in the needs assessment, what your recreation type was and that kind of thing? Is that plugged into this at all or not?
So the needs assessment does, so we consider this, can you clarify your question there?
Well, I can't remember the exact question on the needs assessment, but I thought there was something indicating what your primary recreation was
In the question.
Right.
in the questionnaire. And is that used, because that's more recent data, right?
Right, and I utilized that, yes. We did those questionnaires and the results that you guys provided, not only use the outfitter and guides, but the general public as well. I did that, I'll get to that slide, but I did incorporate that as well. So, yeah.
This 5-year data that you guys are collecting, where and how are you collecting it? It's not from the permit boxes, is it?
No, this is a national data collection model. So it is organized and facilitated out of the Washington office. Money is provided each year. It is a very standardized collection and survey model that we use. It has some very specific parameters, and the money comes down to comes to each forest to complete it every single year. So this is literally, it ends up being people on the ground on sites. They randomly select sites, they randomly select dates. There's a variety, like I said, a variety of different parameters with it. And then people are on the ground physically surveying people, physically surveying visitors.
Would we have seen them out this summer on the trail and in the SNRA?
They should have, and I'm not sure if it got, I'm not sure where they're, Susan, do you have an answer for that? Yeah.
Yeah, yep, so our forest has been leading that effort, and we have a crew that's been out there. They started, gosh, I'm trying to remember, I want to say they started, I think in the fall of last year, and they'll go through the end of this fiscal year. And they have folks out sitting in general forest areas at rec sites, developed rec sites, and then also kind of some of our higher use areas like Galena Lodge. They have kind of a set schedule that they do. It's, randomly selected based on the locations that we provide. And then you all contribute to that as well. And I don't know if that comes in the form of a letter or a form that you see that you fill out, or if the supervisor's office actually asks for that data from your actual use report. But you do have an opportunity to contribute as well. And that, again, that happens every 5 years, and this is the year that they're wrapping up this data. And as Mary said, we won't see that data for probably another year. And of course, it's been affected this year because of COVID. A lot of the survey sites had to be delayed or rescheduled, and so there are periods of time in the spring in particular where we didn't have any data collected at all. And of course, it would be an anomaly because not very many folks were out. And as you guys know, you were, many of you were shut down at that time period too. So I'm not sure how they'll adjust that. And of course, if you have more questions about that, we can try and answer those. But again, as Mary said, those come from the Washington office. It's handled specifically by a team for the Washington office, and all we do is provide the locations for them.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. So we don't, as with many things with COVID and the current situation, is we have, at this point, we don't know what the changes are going to be, what the repercussions might be for this NVUM survey. Like I said, these surveys are made to be looked at not for specific areas. It's not even looking at this data to be 100% representative, to be representative of the SNRA specifically. It's it's just not the way it's modeled. It's modeled to be a larger glance for the forest as a whole. And so that's why, like I said, we consider it. We never rely on NVM data as a solid decision-making point, because it is a flawed system. It is a survey. We know that there are issues with the modeling of it in general, but it's the best we can possibly do to actually try and gather visitor use information for the National Forest. So it will be interesting to see what happens if these 2020 surveys end up needing to be redone, just like I said, because of COVID, because there was not only were there issues with staff being out, there were concerns with contact, being around people. So it'll be interesting to see if the most recent data needs to be redone. So, and that's just something we don't know quite yet.
Yeah, just one note is I don't, in our 20 plus years, we've never participated in this, as far as receiving a questionnaire that I'm aware of. So it'd be great to be a part of this, because it seems like it is at least a piece of the puzzle that's being evaluated.
Right.
So Joe,
Yes.
Joe, I can check, but I think the way that you participate is your actual use report. So when you submit those go to the Washington office for that use data. And it really isn't, it's not really an opportunity to participate other than the use numbers that you're reporting to us for the type of activity you have. So really none of us are participating. We're really just, getting the data with the information that's out there.
Okay.
Yeah. And like I said, because it is a random sample size, so what the way it works, I guess, just to give you a little bit more of an overview, is the forests provide general forest areas that they have, as well as the season of when those areas are typically used. Then they also provide developed recreation areas. And again, this is talking about whole forest. Those all get put in a bucket. They determine how many X numbers of surveys are going to occur at developed sites, X number of surveys are going to occur at general forest sites, and X number are going to occur during high season, and X number are going to occur during low season. So I mean, it's I am not a I am not a statistician and don't get into the survey side of it, but they have, I mean, it's like I said, we know it's not a flawless model, but when it comes to trying to get an unbiased view of visitor use across a forest, they've developed their process as to how to use it. So it's hard, and it can, and that's why we said, especially when you're looking at this SNRA, the number of visitor uses to the NRA, it's low, and that's the way that random selection occurs. Is there's just also a chance that the general forest areas within the NRA were, they hit it on some random fluky low day, and so you end up not getting 100%. You're not getting 100% accurate information, especially not once you start trying to drill down to more the district level. It's definitely used for that higher level just kind of evaluation.
Are these sites, the random sites, different sites every 5 years, or are they using the same sites every 5 years to get accurate across it?
Yeah, so it's the same sites are put into the random selection pool, unless you have a brand new developed site. So unless a new campground was installed, unless a new cabin was opened to the general public or something to that effect, then you would add those into the pool of sites. The general forest area sites are usually going to be consistent, and again, unless you acquire some new piece of property or something major actually changes. But yeah, they try and use the same sites themselves as well. But again, they go into the sites themselves, and the times and dates when they're going to be surveyed are all randomly selected.
And Mary, another thing that the NVUM data is used for, at least by the Forest Service, whether within any given region or nationally, is to estimate or to extrapolate economic impact that the forest is bringing. But I wonder, I know that in most forests, certainly in Idaho, that there historically has not been broken out an outfitted component of that economic impact within NVUM data. So they'll show overall impact, but the outfitted component, whether through use fee or user fees or the use reporting, hasn't really been captured.
Right.
And I guess this is a little bit off topic, so feel free to skip by it a bit, but it is a pet peeve / project of mine. Do you have any sense of whether in this particular, so in the SNRA, or more broadly, there's an opportunity in the next round to try to capture that more effectively?
You know, I can say that to have it be captured more effectively in the NVUM most likely is not going to happen. They're not big on changing that format or model, but I fully hear and acknowledge what you're saying, because that not capturing the economic impact in general of recreation, we're doing a little bit of it. I still don't even feel like the NVUM adequately represents it. And like you said, it misses a really large component when you start talking about outfitter and guides. I mean, overall, and Susan can probably chime in on this as well, it's we as recreation managers and planners, especially in public lands, know that that's one of the reasons that we're seeing a lack of funding even coming down to the unit levels, because we're not seen as, you know, we still, because we are a multi-use agency, the same with the BLM, there's always been a higher focus on what we consider more production elements. So whether it's range, timber, or oil and gas. And so, but I think, well, I know you all know it, being recreation service providers, being in this business, we all know it on the ground. Susan and other managers are aware that the primary use and the primary benefit people are gaining from our public lands is based in recreation. So there have been a lot of pushes for that. I think, as with many things, it's the most effective pressure to make sure that starts getting captured and reported upward. I mean, the big people we need to hear that is really Congress, and it needs to start being acknowledged by Congress, the level of economic benefits we are bringing to not only the government, but that recreation is bringing into our states, into our communities. We need to get them to recognize that so that we can start being able to be funded to play our part as well. So the easiest way for that to happen is really, it's not coming from pressure from myself or Susan or forest supervisors, but it's coming from the private industry to continue to make sure that those economic impacts and benefits are really being acknowledged all the way upwardly. I mean, and that's at all levels, not only outfitter and guides, but ski areas, and just all the levels of recreation use that's occurring on our public lands is just not being adequately reported and identified, and not being adequately expressed and grasped by Congress and the decision makers at the higher level.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you for that. I could go on that one for quite a while, so I'll silence myself for now.
Okay, so let's any more questions? Like you said, the NVUM, it's a we could spend hours on it. Like I said, we do not treat it as invaluable data. And like I said, it is definitely a larger sample size that's supposed to be looked at more on the forest level and not down to these smaller. So we do consider it. We bring it up because it's our best, one of our, only surveys that identify visitor use, but it is not in any way, shape, or form. It is not singularly one of the things we use as a decision-making point. And it is just one of many considerations as we move forward with this needs assessment. So, so moving on, we also evaluated the outfitter and guide actual use. I will start by saying you'll see that this stops in 2018 when we were completing this. Not all the data from 2019 was in, and so I did not want to provide numbers that were incomplete, which is why we stayed at 2018. Again, we're looking to get the summary of growth and utilization across the board, and it can be easily updated once those, and I think those 19 numbers are probably in now. We just haven't gone back to cycle and finish that up. So as far as outfitter and guide actual use in the SNRA, there are 20 permits with a total authorized use of 27,124 service days. Actual use has been steadily increasing in the last 10 years. There was a 115% increase between 2009 and 2018. Your utilization rates also have increased from 45% in 2009 to 96% in 2018. But as you can see, in 2017, you had a utilization rate of 102%. And I guess to touch on that, you'll see this in a couple of places. We can always be over 100% in areas because people can request additional use days. outside of what is authorized. So if those days are used, then that's where you're going to see these higher than 100. You're going to see over 100% utilization rate. The 4 activities. So I look not only at generalized overall actual use, I looked at actual use by activities as well. And there were 4 activities that had utilization rates above 75% since 2016. So every year these 4 activities were reporting at above 75%. That was boating, horseback riding, skiing, and snowmobiling. I broke this out by actual use and utilization by season. And then boating, we did pull out boating kind of singularly as it is a different, kind of a different element. Again, you'll see that the allocated use will not equal the total actual use. Or mainly this is in some permits, there are more just, there might be like you have 500 authorized service days and it's not broke out by season or type. And so there is a chance when that happens, or if there was an overlap in it, it might be counted, those days would be counted twice for both seasons if that permit specifically authorized use in both summer and winter. So like I said, there's always some, excuse me, there are always some little discrepancies there, but so if someone was authorized 500 service days, they could do, say, hiking, backpacking, and skiing. Their service days would be counted both times in the allocated use here, just so we could, since we don't know 100% how they're using that use, if they don't have to report it out singularly. And so, again, this is looking, so in 2014, looking at the utilization rates, summer use was fairly low at 26%, but both boating and winter were fairly high in the 73s. In 2015, again, you did see an increase in utilization in summer. Winter went way up, and boating held fairly steady. And what you're going to see across this, I mean, is really that your winter use has just been increasing. Summer has stayed really fairly steady, and the winter use has continued to go up. In 2016, utilization was at 120% for winter. 2017 it was at 113, and in 2018 it was 129%. So boating in 2017 also saw a pretty big utilization at 105% there. With summer, again, summer took a big increase between 2014 and 2015, and then has been holding fairly steady, but definitely increasing through the years as well. To discuss temporary permits, these are short-term, non-renewable outfitter and guiding permits that are authorized in increments of 50 service days. You can get up to 200 in a 180-day period. So this is just looking at the number of temporary permits that were issued by year. I did include 2019 because that data was solid and final. You can see that in 2016 there was a big increase of requests for these temporary service days. And then I also there was really only 2 types of temporary permits that were being issued, and that was backpacking in the Sawtooth Wilderness, and then, like I said, this request for avalanche safety on Galena Pass. So we broke it out to show you the amount of service days that were authorized in both those 2 types of temporary permits. I guess I can go by any questions kind of regarding the utilization rates and actual use before we move on to kind of the needs evaluation criteria?
There's no data for actual requests, is there? It's just permits issued and authorization given, but no data for requests built into this. Is that correct?
Yes. Susan, did we have requests in there? I'm trying to remember back to the data in the spreadsheets.
Yeah, we did look at the number of requests and the number authorized, but I don't know that you have it represented anywhere in here. I think that was part of our overall evaluation.
It just strikes me that would be an important number because that indicates the actual, interest or need, you know, from the public or outfitters to have that. So I'd be interested in that number as a part of that, but we move on.
Yeah, I mean, and we do have, and I can go back through there and pull it out. The tricky thing that can be with requests is what we do struggle with is we keep track of formal requests. So actual formal applications for temporary service days are more easily tracked than folks making just those phone calls, talking to the front desk or talking to someone saying, hey, does someone provide X service? But we do have that, and I can pull that out and I can make sure to share it with the group as well. Not a problem.
Yeah, and we looked at both the number of requests, but really the types of activities and the season of use that were requested. So we do have that list. It's just not in the presentation that Mary's working on.
Like Susan said, it was considered in the overall needs evaluation, so, or needs analysis. So the next item that's also considered is what we call need evaluation criteria. And so there was an analysis team which was composed of the recreation, special uses, and wilderness specialists from the unit and some from the forest. And we developed evaluation categories and associated criteria, and this helps to assess that different activities can have for outfitter and guidance services. So when we looked at the public need, we determined that primarily we pulled a lot of that from those the comments that were received both from the surveys that went to you all as well as to the public, to try and look at what people's responses were. And I'll go into this a little bit more, especially when we're looking at public demand. So these need evaluation criteria, and I'll show you it in the next slide as well, it's evaluating each activity throughout these different criteria. So looking at simply just backpacking and the general area criteria for so does it have a high, medium, or low impact on at-risk people's non-traditional visitors and persons with disabilities? So is there a high, is it something that contributes to this? And does the activity itself, is the activity itself available to these communities? Is it, does having an outfitter help contribute to making sure that those folks, and looking just at this first category, that these folks are actually getting out and participating in this activity? Or is it something that can be done without that need? So especially when you look at specialized equipment, if you're talking about hiking, you know, there's a pretty low need. When you look at specialized equipment, you don't have a lot of specialists. There's not specialized equipment for just hiking. But if you look compared to whether it's backcountry skiing, taking folks on pack and saddle stock, snow machining, boating, that specialized equipment goes up into the high category because there is a significant amount of, significant amount of investment that needs to occur in that equipment for people to actually do those activities. So the general area criteria, so we did split this off into two chunks. So there's general area criteria, which is basically everywhere in the NRA that is outside wilderness. Wilderness has a whole different component, and so therefore we have to adjust a little bit. But the criteria we looked at to develop the agency need are really that at-risk youth, non-traditional visitors, and persons with disabilities, stewardship, specialized knowledge, skills, and abilities, regional availability and recreation niche, specialized equipment, safety and risk, and mitigation of resource impacts. And again, there's that public demand. And so when we looked at public demand, what we were looking at is a lot of how many times that activity, again, to use a simple one, we can use the simple one. So like ski yurts or ski touring or ski yurts, how many times was it mentioned, not only by the public, but by outfitters, not only as an activity that they are wanting to provide more access to something that the public is hoping to see more availability of. You know, I went through every single comment and counted out mentions of each activity and concerns and everything to that effect. And that's where we cycled that into the public demand. For the wilderness criteria, there are 2 additional categories that were included in here, and that's contribution to wilderness understanding and appreciation, and then wilderness dependency. However, because of what the nature and purpose of a wilderness is, one of the things that we take out is we did not consider the safety and risk component that is associated with the activities. Wilderness is supposed to, one of its founding principles is that it's supposed to provide some sense of risk for people. It is not a controlled and managed recreation experience. People are supposed to have some sense of independence and almost vulnerability when they're out there. So that is one of the safety and risk was not considered in many of these need evaluations in other areas. Some people do consider the economic impact of an activity, and if that is considered in the general area, it is not something that is considered in wilderness criteria because wilderness are not supposed to be generating income. That's not part of its nature and purpose as defined by the Act. And so really with the wilderness criteria, it was all of these general area criteria in addition to a contribution. Does the activity help contribute to wilderness understanding and appreciation, and is the activity dependent on wilderness? So, I mean, yep, go ahead.
So just to clarify, in you're laying out the need evaluation criteria that is used generally as well as in this instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in the general area criteria, you're saying that all of those enumerated here, all 8, were included or are being included in this current need assessment, and that the wilderness criteria, which is being evaluated in parallel, excludes some of those, but that they are otherwise being included.
Yep.
Is that right so far? So then
Yep.
in the general area criteria, that also doesn't incorporate, so if we're talking about like public need or, you know, need assessment, that also doesn't incorporate economic impact or community needs. Is that right?
It can. Susan, do you want to speak to that? Yeah, you can, so people can, and these are, I can say there's about 10 to 12 or even more. The general criteria are not set hard in stone. It is something that the different units, when they go through these, can determine what is their top priorities on evaluating what they feel is critical to evaluating their needs assessment. So we can, Susan, if you want to talk a little bit about the decisions that went around with that.
Yeah, Erin, I think we elected not to put it in there because it does open up a pretty big can of worms for us. And it would make this whole evaluation process much bigger for us than I think it really needs to be. And I appreciate, you know, your interest and concern with that, but we did elect to drop it. If in the NEPA process, which Mary will also talk about, we feel that's an important part, we can still bring it back in. This need just got left out of the need. Intentionally, it was left out of the need evaluation. But like I said, if we feel like that's an important criteria for us in the NEPA process, we can still go there.
Great. No, thank you. And I think I can see how it might be a double-edged sword. So including it really opens up or broadens the scope of the analysis, which may not actually be in the interest of those interested parties, say outfitters. But at the same time, it is also a guard if there were to be any threat reduction, because as I needed to tell none of the outfitters, not least you two on this call, communities like Stanley or the surrounding areas of the SNRA are deeply dependent economically and otherwise on these activities and outfitted activities specifically. So
yeah, Erin,
that's why I bring it up.
No, thanks for bringing that up. And I think we are highly aware of that. That particularly the community of Stanley is very affected by it. Of course, Ketchum has a strong interest in retaining those economic opportunities that this brings. So I don't think that we're blind to it at all. I'm just not sure that it would be an important factor in deciding where we go from here. But if it becomes an important factor, then we still have another avenue to evaluate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to speak to that, when we do go, it's usually when we talk about the NEPA process and when we're analyzing some sort of proposed action, one thing that I think the folks who aren't in the weeds on NEPA a lot don't think about is we do have socioeconomic considerations and evaluations when we are doing the NEPA process. You know, so much so if you're doing a prescribed fire, if you're doing an analysis for a prescribed fire, that's not going to be a component that's necessarily considered. But when you're looking at something like an outfitter and guide capacity or visitor capacity in general, or these larger scale things, that socioeconomic concern is definitely rises to the top of a higher consideration versus some of the other things. So you do see it in oil and gas NEPA, you see it in some level, usually in range and timber as well. But it is becoming more and more of a factor that we make sure we analyze when we get into that next step, when we are looking at what, you know, have developed the proposed action and moving forward to see what those economic impacts could be to the communities. So that is something that is considered and evaluated in the NEPA process, regardless of whether it was part of the evaluation criteria. So just to give you an example of what we are looking at here, pull out, of course, my file folders got mixed up, but so this is what the evaluation criteria ends up looking like. It ends up being a spreadsheet. We have, you end up having all these criteria laid out. You go through, determine if there's a high, medium, or low. I'm trying to find your high, medium, and low. You go through, rank them all, and then make their determination for what the overall need is. Let me see if I can get my, sorry, I was gonna pull give you an example of what kind of those evaluation criteria. So for example, for this first category here, it's when we're looking at the youth, non-traditional visitors, and persons with disabilities. When we're looking at that, the low criteria is that the activity offers extensive opportunities for youth or non-traditional visitors to participate, and the need is low for outfitter and guides to necessarily provide those services. A medium ranking is that the activity offers moderate opportunities for youth and non-traditional visitors to participate, and therefore the need is more moderate for outfitter and guides to actually provide those services. And a high ranking is more that activity isn't just, and this is looking, I mean, you're looking just inherently what these are providing here. It's that the activity is not, you know, easily accessible. Sorry for my camera issues here. The activity is not necessarily easily accessible to these communities, to youth and non-traditional visitors, or especially to persons with disabilities. And so there is a high need to have outfitter and guides provide those services to help those communities actually engage in that activity. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. With stewardship, again, the activity is not necessarily an activity that's focused on nature-based education or wilderness appreciation. It might not allow for high opportunities to educate the public while they're actually in the midst of the activity. One of the things that I can think of easiest with that is if you're looking more at, say, downhill mountain biking, where you're not really stopping and chatting a whole lot necessarily. So, and like I said, that's just me kind of trying to pull out an example of what a low need for, you know, stewardship. Whereas if you're boating or if you're ski touring or on horseback, you have a lot of opportunity to communicate and educate folks. Outfitters have a lot of opportunity to communicate and educate with their clients as they're going through it. So those are the various, you know, and then again, the activity does allow for opportunities for the public to learn about the forest. And there's a moderate need for outfitters to include education and stewardship messages. And then stewardship with high is that it is focused on providing a really high level of opportunity for the public to learn and care for the forest. And then it's essential that outfitters really include education and stewardship messages for that activity. We see that a lot, obviously with stock use, where folks who are uneducated with stock, even if they could just rent a horse, might not have the knowledge, skill, or ability to utilize them in the backcountry without creating some level of resource damage or something to that effect. Sorry. Oh man, of course. There we go. I'm sorry. So again, went through these all, the team itself went through, they ranked them out. I think, Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys ranked them out individually. We found out where there were commonalities, that people discussed their concerns, questions, you know, where there were discrepancies. And sorry, KSA is knowledge, skills, and abilities. I hate putting acronyms in there, but it also gets a little wide every now and then. So we went through and they ranked every single one of these categories to develop the overall need. Basically, the highs, medium, and lows do get converted into numbers, and then from there, trying to come out with the average for where they're at. So we went through and looked at all of these. Obviously, I'm sure did not hit every single activity. What we were attempting to do is looking at those activities that we knew not only were occurring or had been asked for more frequently, where there had seen some level of request for services, not only from the outfitter and guides, but from the public to potentially provide. And then in this again, and so even though we do these evaluations, this is not the be all end all. If an activity was not included in this analysis, that does not mean it cannot be considered in the future. Really all it would do is if there was a need or a request, we would go through it again in another period in time, and you can just evaluate it by the same criteria. Like I said, this is just looking at that initial big cast of what we have, and going from there. So none of this, even with the needs assessment in general, although yes, there is a needs assessment, it is completed. That doesn't mean it is, it's not written in stone. None of this can't be considered again at another time. New data can always be factored in and can always be considered. So, you know, again, it's hard because you're trying to capture a snapshot in time of an existing condition. And as we know, everything changes. This summer alone, and I know not just on the SNRA, but we're seeing it across the country, the patterns and trends in recreation, outdoor recreation, have just thrown almost everyone for a loop. And so it's really going to be interesting to see if that's the new norm, the level of outdoor recreation participation that we're seeing, the amount of how crowded the forests have been, again, across the nation. So, you know, there's always considerations to take into it. So again, just because things have been determined does not mean anything is set in stone. This is, again, just trying to create that picture of where we're currently at to the best of our knowledge.
Now, I would add in here Joe's earlier question about how we're collecting the information about requests that we've had for different activities. So in that public demand section, Mary, you did a full analysis of all the comments and input that the public provided in the kind of outreach that we did, thanks to Aaron. We got a lot of input there, but also we added in the requests that we had been getting over the years for different types of activities, and whether they were authorized or not authorized, as well as some of the user and actual use data. So that public demand section incorporates quite a bit of information as far as you know, where that comes from and how we made those ratings high, medium, and low.
So you did, Susan. So you actually, I think, anticipated one of my questions. You did incorporate use data into the formula for public demand.
Yes.
And how did you weight the respective variables in public demand? So you have use data, you have the survey results, and then and then historic requests going back whatever period of years. Were those rated or weighted differentially, respectively? Those three or any others?
No, we just basically took the information together collectively and came up with that information. And I think also Mary did some analysis of the public comments. So I'll let her talk
Right.
about that.
Yeah, and so I ended up not going weighted. I mean, you always can. That's the hard thing. We decided to not go weighted with this, to just try and look at basically just trying to keep the consideration. So what we did look at when you're talking public demand, or in that public demand, when we're looking at actual use as well, we were looking at utilization rates, trying to see those. So those activities that we were seeing utilization rates. I broke it out high, medium, low as well, where you're looking at low is below that 25% mark, medium was 25 to 75, and then 75 and above was high utilization, where you're seeing that consistent high utilization rates. And that probably, those numbers are probably not correct now that I'm thinking about it, but I don't have I only have one screen. I'm not operating off multiple screens right now for you guys. And so we looked at utilization rate by activity. We also looked at the number of requests. And so just came up trying to keep it fairly simple. I have noticed, and my counterparts in the enterprise program who do this as well, the more tricky you try and get with your formulas and your math, it opens up a lot of potential for questions. And so trying to keep things as simple and easy as possible, because you can get into those, if you weight the public's opinion over the outfitter's opinion, what are some of the issues you're seeing there? If you weigh the actual use or and the outfitter opinion over the public opinion, what are some of the concerns and issues you're working at there? So we ended up going non-weighted just to try and keep it across the board. But again, we did look at the outfitter and guides utilization. We looked at requests for services. We looked at public's requests through those surveys of the activities they were actually looking for, as well as the outfitters requests through those surveys of activities they would like to provide, the trends that they're seeing. And so it wasn't just the question of what services do you use, what services would you like to use. We relied really heavily also on the question that was provided to the outfitters about the trends that they're seeing, the changing trends that they're noticing, that they're hearing from their clients, that they're seeing on the ground, whether or not it's services they're providing. I know one of the things that, and in another needs assessment that I'm doing is, just that observation of e-bikes and how prevalent e-bikes are starting to be, so we look at that trend question is really important too, that we were hearing from the outfitter and guides too. And so that's looking at, the aging demographics and providing support services to get into the backcountry, those sorts of things as well.
And sorry, I don't want to dominate from other questions folks might have, but I did have one follow-up on that, which is, so in one of your initial slides, maybe the first, and this is, Susan, you shared, I think, some of this language with us or with me before, but a key desired outcome of a needs assessment is to help managers prioritize where needed the expansion and authorization of additional or supplementary, whatever, augmented outfitted services. And it's not necessarily criticism, but insofar, just a question, insofar as in this needs assessment, I'm not sure if there's additional sort of breakouts on this. Maybe there are that I'm just getting ahead of, but where use and request and then requests for additional or new opportunities are aggregated, that it might be difficult to lose where that additional or new opportunity, which is the needs assessment's purpose, can be found. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it does. And so, and this is something else to just to touch on, and this is kind of so again, the need evaluation, this spreadsheet that you're looking at right now is again just another component of the overall needs assessment. What is coming out as high, medium, and low. This again is not any sort of decision tool. This is simply looking at this other component when we try and go through this. You know, the hard thing, there is no set science. The tricky thing about working with people, working with outfitters, working with recreation in general, is there's no easy infallible science to fall back on, like wildlife management or something to that effect. So what we have to do is we factor in ideas. You know, this overall need from the needs evaluation is just another factor in looking at, so even though we did factor in that public demand category there, the outfitter and guide utilization, we also looked at utilization when we're looking at the needs assessment. It is considered insofar of itself as well. So this is just another tool that's helping us try and summarize, trying to get a good feel for the activities that have high, medium, and low demand. And as I'll get on to the next one, a really big, important thing to recognize is simply because something says it has a high need does not mean that it's necessarily going to push it and say 100% you're going to authorize more of this. The same way that something that comes in as low does not mean that there's no way it's getting considered. There's a lot of, I mean, this is, you know, when you're looking at social science in and of itself, it's really, there's a lot of considerations that need to be taken into account. And so this is just, again, another element and another tool in the needs evaluation, trying to set up that background to have an understanding of what's occurring. This is just another way to try and look at it and give ourselves a way to evaluate what we think agency and public need kind of, and again, it's an oversimplification through this table, but just trying to develop in our heads what big picture agency and public need might be for some of these activities. But again, it's not looked at only in a vacuum. And the needs assessment does not come out and say, yep, 100% you need to be permitting. You need to be doing more permitting for backpacking. You need to be, you know, you shouldn't authorize any more, I don't know, snowmobiling assists or whatever, or dog sledding. All it does is provide the information, provide the background. We also incorporated larger scale national trends in recreation as part of this needs assessment. I mean, it's a pretty big document. And what it's supposed to do, it's providing all that background information. These are what we're seeing, you know, this is the data we're seeing from the NBUM. This is the summary of public comments from not only the outfitters, but from the public. This is what we're seeing in the utilization rates for our existing outfitters. This is what we think we've determined, you know, our agency and public need are for these activities. This is what we're seeing trend-wise nationally and even more locally. And so we compile all of that into the needs assessment. So then, as we sit there, we look at the picture, look at what we have, and kind of the next step, and we'll get into this, is then developing what we call more or less a gap analysis. So this is what we have, this is what we feel we need, and so how do we get to those places, and can we make sure that we're meeting our management objectives while we're doing it? Are we still meeting, you know, are we still keeping a primitive experience in this portion of the wilderness when we're actually doing that? So, I mean, there's a lot of components to the needs assessment. Unfortunately, there's no, like I said, there's no simple mathematical equation that you can just punch a few numbers and it pops out and says yes and no, there we are, and here we are with a full thumbs up.
Sure.
So when we looked at the public involvement, I pulled out some common themes and common trends. Every single comment, I mean, obviously from the outfitter and guides, we expected this. This was from the public surveys. Every single survey from the public identified that there was a level of recreation commercial services needed. And again, we're looking at the NRA specifically. They did not feel like there were any areas where recreation commercial services were not appropriate. Although there were, you know, some popular recreation areas and seasons where folks had identified, and I think even some of the outfitters also identified that there might not be additional capacity for more outfitters in some of those more popular areas. Again, from the public, that outfitters do play a role in protecting the resource and are partners with the land managers. Hunting, fishing, and skiing were the most frequently mentioned activities in all surveys, both outfitter and public. Another real big theme was expansion of backcountry hut systems to not only improve connectivity, but to provide increased access, and then also to disperse winter use. And also a big desire to provide longer hut-to-hut opportunities and potentially expand those into the summer as well. River-based recreation was highly valued. It popped up quite a bit. And there was also a pretty common theme that there were a handful of trailheads and parking areas that are not meeting the capacity for the current level of use. As far as trends, obviously more people are recreating in the SNRA. And again, this is coming just from the public involvement piece, looking through the public surveys as well as the outfitter and guides. Obviously that it's getting more and more difficult to find campsites closer to trailheads. Hunting use is increasing, that there is an increased demand for short duration excursions. Mountain bike use is increasing, and that there is a lack of stock experience, but kind of a desire for pack assisted trips. Obviously, when I say winter and summer, the winter aspect came in not so much from livestock, but from snow machines. People wanting to get into the backcountry, not feeling like they could necessarily carry as much gear as they would need on their own when trying to get in the backcountry in the winter. Again, the older aging demographic and persons with disabilities wanting to visit and wanting to get more into the backcountry, but needing assistance. And we're also seeing an increase in diversity in visitors. And then additionally, the backcountry skiing is becoming more popular. We saw this both on the public and the outfitter questionnaires, that it's becoming more accessible to all variety of skill levels with the developments in equipment, and that it's just it's really on the rise in the SNRA. So those are some of the common themes and common trends that I pulled out that were reoccurring most frequently in those surveys. So when we pulled it out, the high needs, looking, like I said, so looking just through the evaluation itself, that needs evaluation criteria. The high need commercial recreation services were fishing, with floating and river-based, horseback trips, including overnight, assigned sites, progressive travel, winter backcountry skiing, technical mountaineering, water sports, again, river-based, rafting, kayaking, canoeing, and then winter yurt-guided skiing. In the wilderness areas, the top four were horseback again, hunting, both foot and horse assisted, technical mountaineering, and winter guided yurt skiing as well. So those were the ones that came out as the high from that, from the needs evaluations. So the next steps, and again, and one of the things I guess I adjusted this presentation. So one of the big kickers, like I said, is just because something comes out as high does not mean that it is a mandate that we must increase use. And just because something came out medium or low doesn't mean it's going to be ignored. If there is a need, a viable need, if we see that we can accommodate it, there is no reason to not potentially authorize that kind of use. So again, these are all just components to a larger survey, or a larger analysis, again, just providing that background documentation of what is occurring in the NRA, what kind of use is being requested in the NRA, and where there might be gaps and where we can meet and accommodate those needs moving forward. So to get into next steps, kind of the where do we go from here? So the where do we go from here is the managers, Susan, including, and as well as the NRA manager, they took a look, they look and study the needs assessment. They then start deciding to if they need to go into the development of a capacity analysis. And what that really includes, we use capacity analysis, and I should have taken that out of there. That's kind of an older term. It's what a lot of us are used to, is relying and sitting strictly on outfitter and guide capacity. But what we really are moving towards, and what we really like to consider it, is more this strategic outfitter and guide planning. So evaluating the NRA, incorporating the wilderness areas, identifying areas of concentrated use and transitional use. So those are the areas that are getting what we consider a concentrated use area is an area you would, or site that you feel is basically, you know, you wouldn't want to expand or encourage more use there. It's already really popular. People are already starting to be displaced, whether usually by choice at that point, where they don't want to be there because they feel it's too crowded. Transition use areas are those areas that do have the capacity to provide that there is some room for growth, not only outfitter and guide, not only permitted and commercial, but also publicly. Then you start looking at limiting attributes and resource issues and concerns for those areas. You know, limiting attribute can be the easiest one to think about for that would be parking spaces. What's a trailhead? Does the parking space, you know, does the trailhead need to be expanded to accommodate increased use? Can the area itself accommodate more use, but the parking lot is drastically undersized? So how would you increase services if that's without doing something to adjust that limiting factor? You also look at resource areas, resource issues. I mean, so that can be, you know, threatened endangered species habitat. It can be other, you know, erosion concerns, watershed concerns, something to that effect. And then concerns as well. So are there already conflicts between the public? Are you seeing a lot of need for law enforcement officers to be out on the ground in that area to try and break out disagreements between members of the public? Or are you seeing an increased amount of tickets and citations for people not following regulations that are out there? And then we really move into determining those visitor management strategies. And so one of those management strategies can be a capacity. And that can be looking at it, you know, there's a lot of thought and a lot of has occurred on capacities, especially outfitter and guides capacities over the last few years. In the past, capacities were very much, you know, there was only one way to come up with a capacity, and that was a singular number. But we kind of the science and the thinking on that has started to slowly evolve, as well as the policies on that since about 2012. And so what we really start looking at is, you know, looking not only with the needs assessment, you know, talking with the land and resource managers, and I mean, even in considering and talking with the outfitter and guides is looking, you know, where can services be expanded? What kind of services can be expanded? Are we saying we can increase all services, all types of services in an area? You know, can we just add, you know, some range of some range of authorized use to increase all services across the board? Or do we need to look at it specifically, you know, winter use or backpacking use or anything to that effect? So there's a lot of considerations that go into that. And then as they develop a visitor use management strategy, that would really be the quote unquote proposed action that would move forward into environmental analysis. You know, and from that, once there is a proposed action developed, whether or not it is set, you know, whatever it's going to be, then it goes out for scoping, and that's when we really start triggering the public process. And I can't speak for Susan and how they're going to run it specifically, but there's most likely, even as they're looking at developing this proposed action, looking at developing this strategic outfitter and guide plan. There's a lot of steps in between here and there. Nothing really happens in a vacuum. So to just kind of give a little bit about kind of what a capacity is, like I said, the thought process has kind of changed. And when I came in 2009 and started as a outfitter and guide permanent administrator, I mean, capacity was a pretty hard number. That was it. There was only one thing as to what a capacity was, and you came in and it was, you know, 15,000 service days, and that's it. Like I said, the thinking has kind of started to shift a little bit. And so an outfitter and guide or visitor capacity, it is a management tool. In some cases, it is a legal requirement. It is a legal requirement primarily for wilderness areas and for wild and scenic rivers, as well as national historic trails and national scenic trails. But a capacity is a number. It does need to be based on desired conditions. So it's not just pulling a number out of thin air that makes someone feel comfortable, but it needs to incorporate what it is we're trying to provide in a desired condition based. And so that means not only for the resource, but that means what kind of social experience people are getting, not only clients, but the general public as well. And it definitely is, having a capacity is a precursor to making any sort of allocation decisions. And as I've said before, it is based on a variety of inputs. Capacity is not an isolated decision, and developing a capacity is not the same to developing a visitor use management plan. You know, identifying a capacity in a vacuum, like I said, is not going to solve, is not necessarily just a be all end all solving some sort of resource problem or concern. So capacity, like I said, traditionally capacity was a singular static number. Kind of social science and moving forward in recreation, it's begun to recognize that more dynamic solutions are necessary. So there's a variety of ways that a capacity can be expressed. A capacity can be a singular number. You know, you can say we're only going to authorize 15,000 days of backpacking service days, period. You can talk about capacity expressed in a range. So that's giving more, you know, saying, well, we think from what we've seen from existing use, from the existing conditions and what people are asking, we think that maybe the appropriate number of authorized service days for backpacking is between 10,000 and 20,000. So that's where you go. This gives you opportunity to adjust up if you're not seeing any negative impacts at whatever initial starting point you're coming. It also allows you to adjust back if you do start seeing negative impacts to the resource and social and the social experience that people are affecting. You can also express capacity through indicators. So, you know, saying, and an easy one would be for like a very primitive area of the wilderness, to say that the indicator that you have, the indicator and threshold, is you don't want people encountering more than 3 groups a day. And so that's your capacity, is how do we try and manage people to make sure that folks aren't running into groups in that capacity, you know, in that encounter threshold. So really looking at an indicator, and the reason you'd be focusing on that is you're basically saying, if you were going to do an encounter, is you're saying the social experience is the most important condition that you're managing for in that specific area. You want people to feel isolated. You want people to have a high degree of solitude. Capacity additionally, we don't have to do just coming up with a number, say, let's just go back to the singular, like 15,000 backpacking days. That doesn't have to be for the entire SNRA. You can break the SNRA into various zones and have any one of those top 3 capacities, the number, range, or indicators can either be done for the, you know, the NRA as a whole or into specific geographical zones. And then additionally, you can have more site-specific capacity, which we see more in like developed recreation sites. So you can only have X amount of people in the campground in the day use site, you know, per day, per hour, depending on what the site is. So those are kind of the various different ways the capacity can be expressed as the managers will start to move into that strategic outfitter and guide planning. These are some of the options that are available to them in the way we start thinking about capacity, instead of just there only being that one singular big number just looming over the head. So, and that's really all I have. That's a lot of information I know that I dumped on you, and it was only, like I said, just trying to pull the highlights out of the report in and of itself. But what questions can I try and answer for you guys?
I have one, but I've hogged it. Does anybody else have a question before I jump in?
This is Louise, Aaron, and Susan. I had a question in regards to those others that may have been involved in the initial analysis. Being that hunting is part of these activities, was the State Fish and Game Department, did they have the opportunity to provide input in regards to any of their concerns? Since the topic of hunter congestion has been a huge issue with the department and the commission this past year. So I'm just, my question is, was their input taken or received as part of, part of an agency survey here, another sister agency, or not, and whether that is significant to some of the outcome of this analysis.
Yeah, Louise, thanks for bringing that up. So it was not in the needs assessment, and it definitely will be a large component of the NEPA and the environmental analysis that follows. So as we start working through the proposed action and decisions that we may be considering, alternatives that we may be considering, we will definitely reach out to all of the regulation agencies, including Fish and Game.
And I can speak, during that, the need evaluation, we did incorporate the wildlife biologists. The local wildlife biologists were also part of that. And so since they do, you're right, they don't necessarily connect with Fish and Game in the sense of hunter congestion, but we did talk, they did have a say. They were part of that evaluation process as well, simply to input, looking at habitat, population, all of that kind of stuff as well. But like Susan said, the big part to really start engaging with them would be in the next process as we start building what we call the NIFMA. So building that strategic plan, talking to them and seeing where their concerns and issues lie there. So yeah, they will be definitely incorporated into that.
Thanks, Mary. I just had one final comment. I noticed in the, let's see, it's been a couple of frames back, that the considerations under the components, I think it was, where the area where safety was a concern. Unfortunately, outfitters do have to adhere to the state's requirements, and the state of Idaho's licensure procedure requires that outfitters are cognizant of the public's health and safety, regardless of whether it's in a wilderness area or a non-wilderness area. So from the standpoint of what the state requires of outfitters, it's somewhat different from what the considerations that you are making here. So outfitters that are floating in wilderness or fishing in wilderness or hunting in wilderness have to, generally across the board, have that consideration in mind when they are servicing the public. So it's a state requirement. It's just a comment in regards to how you've classified those differently.
Right, that's a great point to identify. Thank you for bringing that out.
So Susan, Mary, I guess I have a question. So the way that in conversations and as well as in previous calls that we've had, the way that the intent of this needs assessment was framed was to take a picture and to say, if managers in future, such that if managers or when managers in future are presented with a question about, authorizing additional use or about an additional need for outfitted services, they might be able to look back at this assessment to inform that decision. And somewhat new, maybe I missed it in there, maybe some of the other permittees or folks on here knew differently, but somewhat new is this next step. So that, and one of my initial questions was that this is necessarily leading, I was going to ask early on, but it was sort of answered for me, is this necessarily leading to a capacity analysis or to some sort of NEPA process, which is not necessarily, but by nature, also a potential limiting process or reductionary process. And so with the next steps, I mean, we start out with what the assessment is not, and it is not a capacity analysis, but it is leading to a capacity analysis, it seems. And I guess the concern from the industry side is when we're talking about capacity analysis, whether by site activity or anything else, we are like outfitters just by nature, permittees are folks that can be limited because you can target, right? You can't target sort of general population going to a parking lot in the same way that you can a permitted outfitter. So I guess I guess the question is, maybe Susan, if you can, or Mary, but maybe Susan, if you can give me some sense or have some sense of what the timeline, intent, and scope of the capacity analysis that it seems is to follow from this is going to be.
So I think we're getting stuck on a capacity analysis, and I think the intent has always been to do this needs assessment so that we can have an informed process through a NEPA process to determine what our framework for outfitting and guiding will be from here on out. So even though you're asking the question about capacity, I think the NEPA analysis is what's going to help us choose from those different options that Mary showed in her last slide. Maybe Mary, can you back up to the kind of different options for, there you go, for a capacity could be a set number, capacity could be a range of numbers. It could be a number that's based on indicators or a number that's based on zones or site specific. So the NEPA analysis is going to give us the opportunity to make some decisions about what outfitting and guiding will look like in the future once this NEPA analysis is done. So it'll take this needs assessment into consideration, and then it'll take those other things that we've talked about historically about, wildlife, wilderness, wild and scenic rivers, public interest, public comment. So our typical NEPA analysis will go through that process using this information that Mary's just shared with you today. And then we'll make some decisions about capacity that, again, will be our go-to for our area ranger to make a decision when a request comes in. Say an outfitter wants to add extra days, whether they want to do it through temporary days or long-term, or new outfitter wants to propose a business. So that the result of that NEPA, we hope, will help us make those decisions without having to do this all over again.
But it is also part of the nature of a capacity analysis. I mean, I'm looking at the frame I took a screenshot of now that it could also indicate a reduction in use, right?
It could, I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it always could. But the thing to keep in mind is that, and one of the reasons, and correct me again if I'm wrong here, Susan, is it's really difficult for the managers to continue to meet requests for additional use and increase use. You can't really increase use or new activities without doing the same kind of analysis, like I said. So it's really the development of a strategic outfitter and guide plan. This is what we see we need. These are the areas we know we can increase use. These are the areas that we know we currently can't. And just because you can't increase use does not mean you're actually going to decrease use. It just means whatever authorized use is currently existing in that area is probably where we're going to say, if people want to, some new outfitter and guide wants to come in and wants to, propose some activity in an area that's already permitted, is already fairly, both outfitters and the public are saying, listen, I think I don't think we can handle anymore here. Capacity's scary. Listen, capacity's scary. I know that, especially from the private area. There's a really negative connotation that goes along with capacity when we talk about it. That is something I think we as the agency can wholeheartedly acknowledge. But that's one of the concerns that, one of the things that you really have to think about. If people are wanting to expand their businesses, expand their services, and even expand where they're providing things, we really can't do that without developing a strategic plan that includes usually some sort of capacity in and of itself. It might not be a set number, but you have to know where you can expand and where you can't expand before you can make those decisions. I don't know that there is any intent to start cutting anybody's numbers or reducing capacity in an area unless there is like some big major, I don't know, a snowmobile hits a Wolverine and we're having some big issues. It's just, but we really, it is that is the next step, is really it's developing this plan. And that's why we kind of like to use that term strategic plan instead, because it's looking at management tools and tasks and trying to give sideboards how we can allow people and how to allow the private industry to expand and shift and meet changing needs and trends all while making sure that we're meeting the public's needs and making sure that we're protecting the resource still. So I know it's, like I said, I know capacity has a negative connotation. That's why I feel like we're kind of trying to move away from it a little bit, because it has some very, I mean, it does. It's got some bad energy tied with it. But yeah, I mean, that's really the next step, is to develop that plan so we know how to meet requests, incoming requests that are looking for more use, that are looking for expanded days or looking for a new service, so that Susan and the area manager can look at that request, can look at a strategic plan and say, we know where we want to be in 10 years, and we know where we don't want to be. We don't want to be.
Sure. So I guess
Because it's in my backyard, I'll say it. Because it's in my backyard, I'll say it. You don't want to be the Snake River where there's 40 fishing boats going by a single point, you know, in a 30-minute period. You know, you're not wanting to do that. The outfitters aren't necessarily even wanting, that's not the, you know, the experience they want to provide either. And so it's really trying to develop that plan a lot, and it's a long-term, you usually look 5 to 10 years, strategic plan of what it is you want to provide, and how you can make a decision space much easier and more fluid, not only for Susan and the area ranger, but also for your outfitters when they actually are coming to Susan with a new proposal.
Can I ask a quick question, Mary?
Go ahead.
So, not to hang on the capacity issue, but like, for example, River Outfitters, the current capacity was just pulled out of a hat thinking that we'd never hit it. Right. Is there a framework that you would use to judge capacity? Like, is there something that the Forest Service has outlined for you to create capacity on a river system? Or would that just be up to the forest itself?
So there is a framework. So not only there's an interagency visitor use management council that is Park Service, BLM, Forest Service, and a couple of other additional agencies involved in there that developed kind of a visitor use management framework, which includes capacity. The Wild and Scenic River Association also then stemmed off of it and developed more a framework for developing a capacity for Wild and Scenic Rivers specifically, that now has some more common sideboards, because you're right, in the past, when it comes to river capacity in general, and really capacity for any of these developed trails, there's, again, unfortunately, there's no set formula that we know works. I mean, that's the hard thing. We're talking about people, and people are much more complex than antelope. And so to say that there is a set number of capacity that can, you know, that we 100%, this is the number we know, ride or die, that we can accommodate before it affects things. But there is a new framework that really tries to spell things out and is looking more specifically at what, you know, what you're looking at for, again, and this ties back to that desired condition. What are the conditions what is the experience you're trying to provide? What is it you're trying to protect for? And then coming up more with some sort of range, as well as some sort of monitoring to make sure that the decision you make, especially when there's a capacity, is the right decision, and to give yourself that flexibility to adjust if it's not. And that's, you know, it could be adjusting up or down. You know, if you came up with a capacity that you thought you were never going to meet, and you start meeting it, so then we look, are there negative impacts? Are there negative results that we weren't expecting that need to get mitigated? If so, then there might need to be a downward adjustment. But if you're looking at it and saying, listen, nothing of concern is occurring, and we're hitting this capacity, that means obviously we can look at an upward adjustment potentially, or have some more flexibility to adjust with that. But Susan, I'm also going to turn this over to Susan, because the river piece is a whole different, it's not something I've touched on. So I'll let Susan have the microphone.
I don't want to bore the rest of them. We could talk about it later, Susan, but I just quickly, is that decision made locally then?
Are you asking me that, Dave?
Yeah, is that made locally, not federally?
It's made locally, but it's with federal input, of course. The regulatory agencies, as you're aware of, play a really big role in the decisions that we make. So in your case, I'll just briefly talk about that. in the case of the river permits, we went through extensive analysis based on spawning salmon. And so then the capacity is set in with input from the National Marine Fisheries based on the amount of take for those salmon. So in order for us to change that capacity, we would need to go through another full analysis with their input and make a different decision that way. And so that's right now we're holding on to the numbers that we established initially based on the collaboration with those other regulatory agencies. So it's like Louise had mentioned earlier, we communicate no matter what with those other agencies when we're making our decisions.
Sorry, David, I think you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say thanks. We're good.
So, and just to follow up on that, Susan, so it's going to stick with the original numbers until this capacity analysis, right? Because this is forest wide at this point. So that will necessarily factor in the river folks as well, right? So any addition or limitation would be factored into that comprehensive capacity analysis.
No, it was the decision of the area ranger to separate out the river outfitters because we knew how controversial that could be. And so we've been talking with them directly about some kind of a NEPA analysis based on proposals that they provided us, because we really felt like that component of outfitting and guiding could potentially bog down our ability to respond to some strategic plan like Mary's been talking about for all of the other uses. So the area rangers made a decision to look at that separately if the outfitters so choose to move forward.
Yeah, being complicated by ESA. So a more global question that I have on, oh, sorry, somebody else going to speak there?
Yeah, this is Darrell, and I apologize, but I need to go, but thank you for putting this together.
Thanks for joining, Darrell. So the global question I had there was when the SNRA is engaged in this capacity analysis, and there is an area where they deem, and it doesn't seem like there's, and I understand to some extent why, but that there's any set formula for establishing what capacity means in any given case, let alone site. But if it is determined that, a given site or a given activity or whatever that is at or above capacity, then is there any plan to create in parallel to an outfitted strategic plan, a visitor strategic plan that looks at not necessarily limiting just outfitter use or capping outfitter use in those areas, especially given the responses from the needs assessment, which shows almost comprehensively, it seems, Mary Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, a high demand for outfitted and even additional outfitted services. So is there any possibility of incorporating in a management plan for visitors, just general non-outfitted public? Because, outfitters, we talk about it like this binary, but this is public use, right? Outfitters are public use. It's the outfitted public. So is there any plan to look at how, if it is necessary to limit or to cap, that can be applied more fairly across users rather than strictly on outfitters?
Through this process, Aaron, no, we don't have any plan to look at any potential restrictions for the general public. However, we do know that there are some areas of great concern for us that we've been discussing, maybe how to better manage those areas. And I think we'd be looking at them more site specific or area specific. And honestly, I think we want to get through this process so that we have the ability to give the yes/no answer to the outfitters rather than leaving them constantly in limbo. And if we were to open it up to a unit-wide capacity question, we'd be doing this for the next 10 years. And honestly, I don't have any interest in it. And I'm pretty sure the rest of the outfitters want to get to some answers for us so that we can give yes/no answers. But really, we do recognize that there are some problem areas where we do need to look at the general public use as well. So it is definitely something we'll be thinking about and discussing as we move through this NEPA process. It's not something we'll be saying, yeah, we're looking at outfitters as being the issue. We'll be looking at the overall use. And Mary has some experience with that, I'm sure, and can contribute to, a comment here, but she will be involved through the NEPA process and helping guide us through those evaluations as we look at those more problematic areas.
Right, and I can speak to that a little bit. That is definitely, you touched on something really important. And again, this goes back to it. It's hard to deal with anything recreation based in a vacuum. You can't look at outfitters and say that it's obviously the outfitters that are resulting in some sort of capacity issue. And so that's definitely something that needs to be brought up and that we make sure is really well outlined for our specialists as we're going into not only developing the strategic plan, but then going into the environmental analysis side part of that. It's really making sure that we highlight the fact that, just because there is some sort of resource concern or issue does not mean that the only way to solve that issue is, and it absolutely should not be the consideration that the only way to solve that issue is to limit outfitter and guides. So that's not, this is when we look at these strategic outfitter and guide plans, and even if you look at zones or look at an area where you have some sort of resource concern, we're not saying that just because we're looking at that and we're talking in the context of outfitter and guides, that it is then the outfitter and guide's responsibility to solely fix whatever that resource concern is. So that is definitely a consideration that is brought heavily by not only the what we call the interdisciplinary team lead. So that's the person running the NEPA process that whatever we would take that's developed in that strategic plan moving forward. It's not only that ID team lead's responsibility to make sure that the area manager, but then all the team members from whatever resource area they're coming, whether it's wildlife, range, recreation, it's really making sure that that sideboard is clearly defined. And that's something you do at the beginning of the process. And at the beginning of even these strategic outfitter plans is it's not up to the outfitters to solely fix some sort of problem where they're just a player and not the sole carrier. The sole responsibility doesn't lie on the outfitter and guide's shoulders to fix some sort of issue that the general public is a player in too. And I can, I can liken that to, it is complex and it is hard. And the easiest thing, if you're gonna want to liken it to more the biological side, look at it at animals. If you happen on a backcountry wallow area and you're looking at it, can you wholeheartedly say that it's cows or is it elk? And so it's making sure that we are taking into full consideration. And outfitters are just a player. They're a player in a big game with a lot of people. Because not only is it just the recreating public, whether it's commercial or private, that are out there, but there are all other resources. There's other things that are other uses that the land's being used for out there. And so making sure that it's not looking at it, again, we can't look at these things in a vacuum because it's not fair to you as the outfitters and it's not fair to the general public to be the sole bearers of the responsibility for that. So that's, although it is complex, like Susan said, if you start moving into a larger scale visitor use management plan, that's ideal world. Yes, you would do it all at one time. It just really gets you it can get you really bogged down. So what we do is just make sure it's clearly defined from the get-go. As we're looking at this, it is an outfitter and guide strategic plan. We are looking at how best to accommodate and respond to needs and requests from the outfitter and guides and needs and requests from the public. But we're also taking into consideration that, especially if there are areas of concern, that's not the full responsibility of the outfitters to fix whatever the problem might be.
Thank you. Yeah, and I really don't want to dominate anymore. I'm sure people have other questions. I think, I asked because hopefully if there were some parallel assessment, then there would be at least some concrete thing to provide that degree of assurance versus sort of the intent to not shoulder outfitters and guides with it. And it's not a matter of any given person in the forest, right? It's just experience of outfitters and guides generally has been that unless there is some sort of structural guarantee or protection, that we are more often than not bearing those burdens as an industry. So I'll just throw that back out there, but I really don't want to dominate anymore. Does anybody, any of the outfitters, any other folks here have questions so I can stop?
Yeah, Joe here. Sorry, did I just come in on someone?
That's all right. Go ahead, Joe. It's Louise.
Okay. Hi, Luis. Hey, just a question, a clarification on the next step. I'm uncertain as to what the next step is, but if I understand, it's to visit this, outfitter and guide visitor capacity, and that, if I'm hearing it correctly, is done through a NEPA process that's going to deal with all of these requests as a single unit, separating out the river section. Is that what the next step is that the SNRA is going to be doing on this?
So the next step is to begin basically a proposed action to create a framework that we'll be able to work within. So you heard Mary talk about kind of a strategic plan. That's what we're going into next, is developing that strategic plan and going through the NEPA process. So the desire is that we spit out a decision basically that is that framework. So we plan to get involved in that proposed action sometime this fall, late this fall, once everyone comes back out of the field and the fires are done. And Mary hopefully will be continuing to help us with that. There's been some changes in the team that she works with, and it sounds like maybe she'll be able to stay with us through that process. But basically we'll be taking the information that we have gained from this needs assessment, develop a proposed action for that strategy that we just talked about, that framework on how we're going to be able to manage outfitters on the Sawtooth NRA, and hopefully make a decision sometime by the fall of next year. So ultimately, we're looking at geographic areas potentially that we might be putting some numbers to. We may be looking at NRA wide, but really this slideshow that Mary has up right now is we'll be selecting probably the most appropriate type of capacity that we feel addresses some of the needs and issues we have on the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. And then we'll come out with some guidance on how we're going to authorize new uses, authorize existing uses, changes, requests, anything that would come into us in the form of a change to the existing outfitting and guide program that we have now. And then the goal would be that we have something in hand, you have something in hand that gives us that ability to say, if you say, for example, Joe, you guys come back and say, hey, we're looking for 1,000 service days. We hopefully can go back to this decision that we made and say, is that reasonable in that location they're asking? And if it is, then we can move forward with authorizing it. If it isn't, maybe there's some negotiation between what our decision might say and what you've requested. It just gives us the tools, we hope, to be able to make those decisions. So again, we hope to get rolling on that next step this fall and then hopefully wrap up a decision by next fall.
And so is there any participation amongst the outfitters in this process over the next year? Or is this all in-house where you guys are doing your thing at the NRA and we just wait to hear back?
Nope, it's just like all NEPA processes. You'll have the opportunity multiple times to provide public comment as well as the general public.
And as far as additional requests, things that are specifically been requested in the past, do we follow up with that in the near future? Do you know to highlight things and have these discussions?
You're welcome to share those with us again, but most of that stuff we've been tracking and there'll be things that we're considering and we have been considering through the whole needs assessment. So we're not going to be making very specific decisions about specific actions. We hope to be looking at that more generically so we can answer those questions in the future.
So if I hear it correctly, by next autumn, somewhere around there, you should have the framework from which to make decisions on specific issues, outfitter requests, public requests, that kind of thing. Is that the timeline we're looking at, roughly next year, to begin to have that?
That's our goal. Yep. If we can get through that NEPA process, then yes, that would be our goal.
Okay.
Do you guys have is it on your radar at all on how to address the anomaly of this year? I know the capacity this year has been insane. I mean, if you were to talk about capacity this year, just the amount of day use and overnight use and land-based hiking and backpacking has been way different this year than I've ever seen it. So since this is a 5-year survey year. I mean, you guys have a good way to address that and those anomalies, because I feel like we're going to see a lot different use next year compared to what we did this year. I mean, is this survey from this year even giving an accurate representation of the jump in use from 5 years ago? How are we going to address that?
I think Mary tried to address that early on when we were talking about the National Visitor Use Monitoring that's occurring this year. Is we don't know. We know that this is an anomaly. We know there are big gaps because of the period in time which we weren't able to do some of the surveys that we had intended. And we are not using this 2020 NVM in any of our evaluations. So I think we're using more of the historic information. But honestly, we don't know, what's going to happen as a result of this year. I think we're all a little afraid that this may be part of the new norm. I think it may be, a way that the public's seeing their public lands and their nearby opportunities and getting experiences and talking to their friends about it. And I have a feeling that we may see this capacity in the general use increase significantly in the long run. We don't know that. I don't think not any of us do. And as Mary said earlier, it's not just the Sawtooth NRA that's experiencing this anomaly of use. It's across the country. So it's really hard for us to speculate on what that might look like in the future, although we're really thinking about that. I think we're talking about it regionally for sure. It's on our radar. I just don't think we have solutions at this point.
And I suspect that this winter we're going to see a bunch of short studies popping out all over the place. I mean, as in so much as even just anecdotally looking at the RV sales, the camper sales, the massive shortage that even occurred. There's going to be, I think, just an onslaught of a lot of studies coming out from a lot of different avenues this winter, trying to put in context what happened on public lands this year. And so there's a lot we don't know yet, but I suspect we're going to start seeing a lot of stuff coming out post hunting season. I'm really curious myself to see if this increase in uptick really carries through all of hunting season as well. I mean, even locally here, I'm really curious to see, if it was more of a short term right there. Well, since schools were closed for so long, that we saw this huge uptick. But unfortunately, we don't know yet, and so. Like so many things, I think we're going to be a little reactive on what happened in 2020. So we're just going to be playing a little bit of a waiting game. And especially as we move into the NEPA analysis, getting into it next year, as this information, I mean, we always try and make sure that we're relying on the most recent information and scientific information that we have. And so moving forward, into next spring, as we start getting more into the heart of this analysis, we should have a better idea and better context as to how to really look at 2020 and how that factors into everything we're thinking about. But yeah, unfortunately right now we're just it's kind of a waiting game to see what it really looks like more on paper. So
I want to take a second while we're talking about this to put a plug in for this unit-wide cleanup that we're working on. I came out of the backcountry about a month ago and had been in a pretty remote area for a couple of days, and then went in through from Alturas and came out through Pettit. And from the minute I left Edith Lake till the time I got back to Alturas again, I was absolutely horrified by the number of people that I saw and the amount of use and abuse that I was seeing. And so I got on a call with a lot of our partners who are doing volunteer work with us, and we pulled together a cleanup that starts on the 19th and it'll go through the 4th of October. And it's an opportunity for folks to get involved in helping us just sort of recover from what we hope is an anomaly, and helping both in the backcountry and the front country, cleaning up campsites where they shouldn't be, dismantling fire rings, blocking routes that hadn't ever been used before, and just doing a lot of restoration work at some of those sites. So we hope that we can kind of get back to baseline again. after this fall, so spring can help us recover. So if you or any of your guides are interested in volunteering at all, there are multiple avenues to sign up to help out with some very specific areas that we identified. SIHA has a website and a link. ICL does, the Sawtooth Society does, the National Forest Foundation does, and so do we. So happy to send out a link to those places for you guys. But you know, as a larger, greater number of partners for the forest, we would welcome your help or input in any way that you can to help us with identifying problem areas and or helping to clean up some of those problem areas.
Luis, I think you had a question there. Oh, sorry.
I did. One is a request, which I see somebody else made, I think it was you, Aaron, is making this presentation available to those permittees that were not available to be at this meeting. I think it is very telling about what your plans are for the future and where you're at this point. And then the other question, which was not addressed as a component of this analysis, are the overall wilderness plans that we all spent so much time on, especially the new ones. Obviously the Hemingway Boulder, and then the White Cloud Wilderness Plan, as well as the previously existing Sawtooth Wilderness Plan. To me, those guiding documents should be also a part of this analysis in some way. And maybe you can speak to that, Mary, but anyway, making the presentation available would be awesome. So
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. I touched on it briefly at the very beginning. No, they absolutely 100% are part of this analysis, and they are made a big part of the document as well. It falls under these components and considerations. Those wilderness plans come under the agency management objectives and the special area management requirements, especially when we're looking at when you're looking at wilderness in and of itself, those wilderness plans are the first and foremost components that we have to look at, and they are going to continue to be a big, they are the guiding documents for use in those wilderness periods. So no, they wholeheartedly, they were considered as part of this, and they will be very much front and center, especially when looking at the wilderness component moving forward. So thank you for bringing that up, and let me, again, so not only the forest land and resource, not only the forest plan, also the SNRA plan, but then additionally every single wilderness plan plays in heavily, because any decision we make needs to make sure that it's meeting all of those objectives, all those desired conditions, and everything that is indicated in those wilderness plans. So absolutely.
And Louise, just to touch on that further, those wilderness plans were the trigger for this needs assessment. We specifically said in that wilderness plan that we would not take any action to approve any new uses, any expanded uses, or any new commercial opportunities without going through this needs assessment and extent necessary evaluation for wilderness. So really this has to be done for our wilderness areas in order for us to consider any changes to the existing uses. So thanks for bringing that up. And really, this was triggered specifically to follow those wilderness plans. We just took the opportunity, because we had been getting so many requests and questions, we took the opportunity to expand it NRA wide so that we could have a strategic plan and stop telling people, oh, when we get to a needs assessment, we'll be able to give you an answer. This hopefully will give us that opportunity to do it unit wide, not just wilderness wide.
Thank you. That answers my question. And then the last one being making this presentation available to others.
Yeah, and I did, as long as Susan doesn't have a problem with it, I actually emailed this to Aaron this morning, like literally a minute before it started, Aaron, so you probably did not see it. But yeah, there should not be any issue with making sure this goes out, as long as that's okay with Susan. That's more on her side of things than mine. And just again, I would always make sure that before anyone makes any, when this does get shared out, making sure if anyone has any concerns, questions, not to make any assumptions off of this, but to reach out to Susan, and then Susan can link them in with me if need be to make sure that they ask any questions they have, so they make sure that they have a clear picture on what they're going and aren't moving forward with any false assumptions, just so we can make sure that it's all clear for everybody. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And Erin, I just want to say again, thank you for pulling this meeting together. And I think that, you know, based on what I continue to hear from the outfitters, I think it would be valuable for us to do this every couple months, and we can keep you informed of our progress and your opportunity to comment and participate in the NEPA process and the proposed action that we'll be moving into this fall. So I'll just keep working directly with you, Erin, and trying to set up those opportunities to do these kind of calls.
Yeah, great. And maybe even more often if possible. I mean, one question I was going to ask, and I'm sorry, Zach, I think I kind of cut you off when I was playing moderator there, but one question I was going to have is, insofar as this next proposed action and ultimate decision bears specifically on outfitters and guides, I was just wondering if there's any opportunity to have more meaningful or in-depth consultation participation in the process going forward than might otherwise be the case. Not least because I think there's just a lot of confusion, or there hasn't going back a little bit, maybe been a lot of clarity on what the next steps are in the process, when that's going to happen, what it means, and how it factors in on outfitters. So if there is any opportunity for the industry or for permittees, IOGA, whoever, to be more involved in the process as partners, I think that'd be really meaningful and certainly appreciated.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'll talk through that with the team and with Kirk, and we'll figure out what role the outfitters can play as a specific partner or individual partners, and we can talk about that in the next Zoom call.
Okay, and then sorry, Zach, you had something a while ago, but I didn't interrupt you.
Oh, I was just gonna follow up on what Susan was saying about volunteering for to get up there and help the effort to clean up Alturas to pet it. And you said there's several ways to do that, but if I can always follow up with you separately on that.
Yeah, I think what I can do is I'll just send a link to the sign up page and the information to Erin, and Erin can maybe distribute it to folks, because it's really a self-serve opportunity to sign up and pick an area and a date that you're available. So maybe that's the best way. Erin, would that be all right with you?
Great. Well, I will stop sharing my screen now. If there's no other questions, it feels like we've kind of wrapped up from my end at least. But like I said, if you have any other additional follow-up questions, you can get a hold of me through Erin or through Susan, and I'd be more than happy to help however I can, answer questions, offer clarification, or anything from there. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional questions or concerns.
Yep, appreciate it. Thanks.
I really appreciate everyone's participation. I think it's really great.
No, go ahead, Susan. We were saying the same thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks to Erin and to all of you for participating. It really is great to have everyone's input and thoughts, and we really do take what you have to say into account as we move through these things. So happy to share with you at any point in time where we're at in the process, and just acknowledge that we are delayed this year really because of COVID. And now we've got, and I want to apologize too, I've been on my phone off and on. We've got a big fire that's blowing up. So trying to balance all of that with a normal workload that we have, and this being part of that, appreciate everyone's patience.
Well, anybody else have any questions before we conclude?
Yeah, this is Louise. I do. I was wondering where this big fire is.
Well, I'm just getting back in from the backcountry, and I understand it's started at Crap Creek and was moving up towards Cape Horn. I asked for an update while we were on the phone, so I've got a couple folks that are working on the fire that I'll try to get some information, and we'll as I know more, I'll share that out. But
Yeah.
I
And Susan,
probably
actually, if you do get any updates, especially on the roads, while we're on this call, I got about 4 text messages from outfitters wondering if they're going to be able to get down to Boundary and further afield. So
yeah, so I just got a text message to one of my guys who said he's the PIO, and I asked him if he could give me an update so I could share with you guys, but I haven't seen it yet. So what I think I'll probably do, Aaron, is when I find out the information, I'll make sure I forward it on to you. So a little concerned
Great.
about how that affects everyone. And again, I don't know any details that would be useful to you at this point, but I will get them.
thanks. Well, folks, thanks for my part too. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Mary. Does anybody else have any questions, parting thoughts, jingles before we go? Nope. All right. Well, I'll try to share out this recording and the presentation first chance I get. Thanks again for the time. Appreciate it.